One of the things that we learn as we grow up is a very basic lesson of life, I think, that alone we really can't do much of anything. We really learn, hopefully sooner rather than later, that we really do depend on others. It's a point of humility, it's a point of honesty, a point of integrity that I think most of us will acknowledge in our lives. We see it all the time, even culturally. Academy Award season. Those thank yous go on and on and on until the band starts. Can't do this alone. We can't do anything alone. You see it whenever anybody gets acknowledged for anything. Now, I could not have done this alone. One of the lessons I learned many, many years ago, I thought I had all kinds of answers. I was that young. Then I went to boot camp. And anybody here who's ever been to boot camp of any kind knows that that's the whole basic point of boot camp, is to take somebody in the front door that thinks they've got all the answers and can do anything, and to convince them in a few short hours that you don't know anything and can't do anything unless all of you work together. In a sense, that's what we hear tonight in these readings. Because if you wanted to cite three giants of our tradition, you couldn't find bigger giants than the prophet Isaiah, or bigger giants in the New Testament than Peter and Paul. And yet what we hear in all three readings is their own acknowledgement that I can't do this. I certainly can't do it alone, and I certainly can't do it without Christ. But with Christ, I can do anything. With each other and in Christ, we can do anything. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking as that first reading was being read from the prophet Isaiah, you know, for many of us who are older, we've seen the Mass go through a lot of significant language changes over the last bunch of years. One of them is, you notice that before the gospel is proclaimed, the deacon gets a blessing from Father, there's a moment of prayer. Even when there's no deacon present, Father pauses and there's a moment of prayer before reading the gospel. There's a little prayer that has been said for many, many centuries before the gospel. Now, it's been simplified in the latest translation, but what it used to say was, "Cleanse my lips as you once cleansed the lips of Isaiah the prophet with a burning coal." And that's the scene you heard in the prophecy tonight. So that before we dare to proclaim the good news, we first need to be purified, we first need to seek to be together with Christ in proclaiming Christ's gospel. We don't do it alone, we don't do it without Christ. That scene with Peter in his boat. You know, here's a pretty successful guy. We figure he owned at least a fleet of 2 boats. He was in partnership with the sons of Zebedee. So on all appearances, he was a successful fisherman, and yet he was not having a good day. Now imagine, he didn't go to the synagogue to have this conversation with Jesus. Jesus came to him. That's pretty good. Jesus came to him. Not only that, he got on Peter's boat and used it as a pulpit to preach to the people. Why? Because the crowds had gotten too big to meet indoors. So he picks Peter's boat to go do this because he'd already picked Peter. Now here's the real deal. Think about this. All of us here have some kind of a profession, some kind of expertise in something. And here comes this guy that has a different expertise. Well, how was Jesus raised? The son of a carpenter. If he had a trade of his own, he was probably a carpenter. He's coming to professional fishermen and telling them where to go fish. I don't know about the fishermen in here, but my guess is that would not be well received. Who do you think you are? We've been at this all night. We're drained. We're exhausted. And instead of coming ashore, having some food, and getting some rest, you have just usurped my boat, and now you want me to go back fishing again? No. That would be a normal response. Instead, Peter says, oh, okay. Okay. And here, Jesus, the amateur fisherman, comes in with this catch. It is so overwhelming for Peter that it finally gets through Peter's thick skull what's going on. This is Christ. This is the Son of God. I can't do anything alone. My crew and I can't do anything, even together. But in Christ, all things are possible. And he becomes so overwhelmed with that realization that this person he has just come to know, that he changes his whole life. Walks away from everything else and follows Christ. Wow, what an impact that had. We see the same thing with St. Paul in the second reading, and so forth and so on, this total transformation of life. You know, believe it or not, this fifth Sunday of Ordinary Time is our last Sunday in Ordinary Time for a while, because on Wednesday we start Lent. Can you believe it? Seems like we just had Christmas. But we're about to start Lent, a period we refer to as a time of purification and enlightenment. So in a way, these readings are opening the door for us into that. Tonight we celebrate a baptism, and one of the lessons that we will talk about with Estelle is that she's not going to be able to do this alone either. She's going to need her family and her friends who have already welcomed her in the sign of the cross. She's going to need all of us too. And she's going to need Christ. All of us here who have been baptized already know that. And now's the time to recommit ourselves to that ownership of our lives by Christ, the Son of God.